In today's video, I want to talk about the role that fear plays in the U.S. housing market and how unwarranted fear can lead to unnecessary and dire consequences. If you want to learn more, stick around. What's up, everybody? It's Jeff with Jeff West Properties, your host for the Conroe Living Channel, where we identify and celebrate everything that makes Conroe, Texas, one of the fastest growing cities in America. If you've been paying attention to housing market headlines over the last 6 months, you've no doubt seen countless doom and gloom projections on YouTube clips and online articles and even the local news. But let me ask you something. Have you ever stayed tuned to the local media because they had a headline that you didn't want to miss, or clicked on an online article because something grabbed your attention, only to find out when you actually read that article it didn't seem nearly as big a deal as the title made it seem? They do that because fear gets attention. Fear gets clicks. Fear gets people to stick around for the next part of the program. In a way, it's just good business. But what happens when these programs and these websites scare enough people? Can it actually have an impact on what is actually going on in the housing market? In this video, I want to show you how not only can it, but actually it already has, and why it is so important that we educate ourselves and protect the housing market from unnecessary fear and unnecessary consequence. Now notice I said unnecessary fear, because sometimes fear is necessary. Sometimes caution or alarm is appropriate in certain situations because it causes you to act. If you're standing 30 feet away from a grizzly bear, and the information that you know says that that grizzly bear can eat your face off, right? That is an appropriate fear because it causes you to take action. Now, I'm no survivalist, so I don't know what the proper action would be. I'd probably soil myself, and I don't know if that's the proper response, but I know it's probably not one that I'm going to be able to help. Sometimes it's wise to be afraid. The man who doesn't know the meaning of the word fear is usually the same man who doesn't know the meaning of a lot of words because they're just dumb. Like, fear is necessary at times. So as far as the housing market goes, some things should cause fear, or at least concern. Here's what we know about what's been going on with the economy and what's been going on specifically with the housing market in the last 6 months. First of all, from the beginning to the end of 2021, the mortgage rate has doubled, and that's never happened in the history of the housing market. Mortgage rates right now are the highest that they've been since 2001. Home values are the highest that they've ever been in the history of American real estate. Overall inflation in America is at its highest level in 40 years. Now, those are factors that should be concerning, and they should elicit the appropriate response. So because the interest rates are as high as they've been in a long period of time, we find that less and less people are looking to buy right now. That's logical. That's a logical response to what's happening. Because inflation is so high, we've got people who are tightening their budgets, families who are tightening their budgets and looking to their savings to make sure they have enough in case something should go wrong. Again, that's a logical reaction. But then there are things that we don't know, that we can only speculate on, and those create a different kind of fear, the fear of the unknown, or FOTU. I know FOTU is not a thing, but we have FOMO, the fear of missing out. Everybody calls it that. Why can't we call it FOTU? Makes sense to me. I'm going to make that a thing. As far as the housing market goes, we have a lot of questions that we just don't have answers to right now. Are we or will we be in a recession, and what is going to be the impact of that? Another question that we don't have answers to. Will the measures taken by the Fed bring the inflation rate back down to 2%, which is their target, and at what cost if it does? What are the future unemployment numbers going to look like? What's the future mortgage rate going to look like? And ultimately, what does that do to the future of housing values? So in these questions, we can start to see how FOTU, in the trade market, can have consequences, with the greater the fear bringing greater consequences. Let's take, for example, the current mortgage rate. What's typically used to forecast the mortgage rate is the 10-year Treasury yield, but today even that's not exactly accurate. Let me explain why. For the last 50 years, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate has moved in unison with the 10-year Treasury yield, with an average spread of 1.7 between the two. So how you would look at the expected mortgage rate is you would take the 10-year Treasury yield and you'd add 1.7, or the average, and that would give you the estimated mortgage rate. So example, from the year 2000 to 2021, the average 10-year Treasury yield was at 3.49%. and the average spread was at 1.79%. So combining those would give you an expected mortgage rate of 5.28%. But check this out. For the last year, the 10-year Treasury yield was 3.69%, but the spread was 2.79%, significantly more than the average. And that gives you a mortgage rate of 6.48, which is where we are sitting today as of this video. So let me explain the spread a little bit. The spread is basically a measure of volatility and fear or panic in the market. Now, movement in the Fed rate doesn't normally contribute to a rise of volatility or panic in the market. But this year, the rising of the Fed rate has not only been a part of the volatility, but it's also been in reaction to the volatility and the panic that they had already been experiencing. We've also seen what fear has already done to the housing market starting in 2020 to the middle of 2022 in the way of inflation. Now, to give you the causes of inflation in layman's terms, there are three basic causes of inflation. You've got what's called cost push inflation, which is where costs go up on goods and services because of something like a natural disaster creating a scarcity, or a labor shortage, or supply chain issues, which we've seen in the last couple of years. And because of that, goods and services become more expensive. You've also got demand pull inflation, which is when you have an elevated demand for goods and services that there's not enough of. Now, there's a third type of inflation, and this is where fear really comes in, and that is inflation expectations, where basically there is a fear that causes people to prematurely buy goods and services for fear that either the prices are going up or there's going to be a scarcity of resource. So let me give you an example of that. Somebody's owned their house for 18 years and their heating and cooling system, their HVAC, is rated for 20 years. And so in a couple of years, they're going to have to replace that system. But in their mind, they're looking at the world today and seeing, oh, the cost of everything is going up. I better go ahead and replace that entire system right now, even though it's still got a little bit of life left, because I don't want to get caught 2 years from now having to pay way more than I could pay today. There's another example that I actually used quite a bit, and that is if somebody were to start a rumor that there is going to be a water shortage. And it's unsubstantiated. There's nothing that really proves that. It's just something that somebody said, and the word gets out that there's going to be a water shortage. More and more people hear about that, and because they hear about it, they go out and they start buying up all the water and hoarding it so they can be ready for the shortage. Well, in doing that, they've just created a water shortage, so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So these examples of inflation expectation show how that fear, that unwarranted fear, can lead to unintended and unnecessary consequences. So as you can see from this chart, some industry leaders are calling for price appreciation and some are calling for depreciation. You've got on one side of the spectrum Realtor.com that says we've got about a 5.4% appreciation across the board in American home prices, all the way down to Zelman and Associates, who see it being above a 5% drop. Now, I do have to say that I keep up with other projections from other reputable experts in the industry just because I want to stay as on top of what people are saying as possible. And we've got groups like CoreLogic, which we use quite often, that sees about a 2.5% jump, all the way to John Burns Consulting, which is, again, another resource we use heavily, that is looking at as much as a 20% drop in the U.S. housing market this year. So we can see there's a pretty huge swing from one expert's opinion to another and all points in between. So why is it so different? They all have the exact same data sitting in front of them, just like I do. They all have the same things that they can see. So why are the projections so different? They're judging it all on the way they believe society is going to react. This shows exactly how much fear can play a factor in our own housing market and our own economy. So then I wanted to start looking at what economists had to say about the Great Recession from a historical standpoint after it was already over. So in June of this last year, Lawrence Kotlikoff from Forbes magazine said this: the cause of the Great Recession was collective panic in the non-financial sector, triggered by a bank run due to panic in the financial sector. By the way, the Great Recession's very name suggests panic. The recession was dubbed great from the get-go. But ex post, it wasn't particularly big. Indeed, it was roughly the same size as the 81-82 recession. Hey, real quick, Before I continue with what all this means and what we can do about it, you know what I'd really love? A puppy. But since you're not here to give me a puppy, you know what you could do? You could click that like button on this video. Seriously, and you've probably already heard this before, but every time you like a YouTube video, it tells the YouTube algorithm this is a video that should be put in front of more people. And if there was ever a message I wanted to get out to as many people as possible, it would be on this subject. Also, I've been really surprised by something that's happened in my last couple of videos, in that they've started going out to people well beyond Texas, to all corners of the United States. So if you would, do me a favor, I would love to know where you're from, so let me know in the comments. Also, if you've got any real estate questions, whether it be about the city of Conroe, the state of Texas, or anywhere in the nation, if I've got an answer, I would love to share it with you. So give me a call, send me a text or an email, I would love to talk to you. I'm a relocation real estate specialist who helps people from all over the nation become proud Texans. So I love real estate, and I love to help anyone with real estate questions. So now that we've seen the damage that collective fear can cause, what I wanted to do is get to the most important part of this video, which is answering the biggest fear questions that people have to try to bring some perspective to what's going on in the market. One question that people have been asking is inflation and the possibility of more unemployment going to sink the housing market? So going by the most recent updates, most recent reports in the jobs market and on inflation, the Fed has said that it is much more positive than they originally forecasted, that what they're doing is actually really working on inflation right now. As far as the jobs go, when people are worried about unemployment, they've found that the job market has been incredibly stable and still historically low. Whenever you have those positive projections, especially if they're more positive than what was originally forecast, you start to have a lessening of volatility and a lessening of fear in the market. That in turn will most likely bring that spread that we were talking about back down to normal levels, which will then in turn bring down the mortgage rates. Another question on that same line is the housing market really frozen? So I guess that depends on what your definition of frozen is. By all reports, we're looking at about 4 million-ish house sales in America projected for this year. Now that is less than what we have typically, but if I do the math, that is about 11,000 houses sold per day in America. Also, and I'm not great with math, but I think that's like 8 houses per minute that are sold in America. So in the amount of time that you've been watching this video, that means there have been about 50 to 60 houses sold during that time.
You're not very good at math.
Now, would that be considered frozen? I would look at it as maybe cool. It's less than it normally is, but I wouldn't consider it frozen. I'm working with about 7 clients right now, just in the month of January, and that tells me there's still a lot of activity that's going to be happening. So another statement that I've been hearing from people is, I don't want to buy at the wrong time. I've got to make sure that I wait for that perfect opportunity. Listen, trying to time the housing market for the perfect opportunity is pretty much a fool's errand. You don't need to be looking, in my opinion, for the best time to buy. You need to be looking at buying when it makes sense for your life. A house is more than just a commodity. A house is a place where your story continues to unfold, your family's story, where memories are made. It's more than just an investment. Now understand, I'm not saying it's a small deal if the market starts to lose money. And if we knew that the Great Recession Part 2 was going to be happening, I would tell everybody to wait. And certainly if you look at the most extreme projections, that's a possibility, but it is definitely an outlier in the spectrum of what everybody thinks is going to happen. Now, keep in mind, real estate is local, and some real estate markets are going to be in worse shape than others. We're already starting to see some difficulty in places like Phoenix, Arizona, Boise, Idaho, San Francisco, California, and yes, even in Austin, Texas. But even in those markets, if you're buying a house to live in as a home, if it's not, again, part of a 1 or a 2 year plan, eventually you're going to be okay. Eventually, owning a home is a good investment. Over time, it will continue to grow in price. You may not be able to time it perfectly right to get the absolute best deal, but over time, it is a very safe investment. There's an old saying in real estate that the best time to buy a house is last year, because it only goes up. You could try to find the best deal, but the reality is the deals of yesterday are gone. All you can do is do the best for where you are today if it makes sense for your circumstance. Another question that people have is, with the interest rates being as high as they are, which they are still extremely high from where we've been over the last 20 years, does it make sense to buy, or will I put myself in a dangerous position for the next 30 years? To that, I say, yes, they're high. Yes, we expect them to go back down, so you could wait, but there are other options to consider right now. If you're worried about the interest rate, there's something that's been really popular in the last 6 months especially, called the 2-1 buy-down program, or the 3-2-1 buy-down program, where basically you pay in advance for a lowered interest rate for a certain number of years, 3 years, 2 years, and it would be your first year. If it's a 2-1 buy-down program, the most popular, you'd get 2% off what the rate of the day is. So if it's 6.5% where we are now, it would be 4.5% in the first year. And in the second year, it would be a 1% decrease. So it would go up to 5.5%. And then in the third year, it would go back to whatever you locked in at. Now, the reason those are so popular is because most people fully expect that the interest rates are going to go down in the next couple of years, or that they're even going to start to go down now. So you buy yourself some relief in the first couple of years on your payments, and then in 2024, 2025, or 2026, if you've got a 3-2-1, then you just refinance at the lower interest rate where it sits that day. One of the strategies that's really popular right now, and I try to use in negotiating for my buyers, is asking the sellers to give a seller's concession that would actually pay for that 2-1 buy-down program. So that cost is not coming out of the buyer's pocket, it's actually being paid for by the seller. Because housing sales are not what they used to be, sellers tend to be more willing to work with us to get a deal done. Another option, and I cannot believe that I am actually suggesting this right now after all the trouble they caused during the Great Recession, the adjustable rate mortgage is back in style. An adjustable mortgage rate is where you have a lower interest rate for, if it's a 3-1, 3 years, if it's a 5-1, 5 years, and then the rate changes with whatever the rate is for that year, and the lender can raise that rate depending on where the rates are at that time. The difference between the risky ones we had back in the past and today is they are heavily regulated by the federal government, so lenders can only increase them so much. Now, these are great for a couple of reasons. If you plan ahead, they could be a very good option for you. If you're someone who knows they're probably not going to stay in the house for longer than 5 years, just get a 5-1 ARM and you'll sell it before that rate ever goes up. Or the other thing you can do is, if, and we do expect this, the interest rates go back down, you just refinance when they've gotten down to a point where it makes sense. Usually if you can save 1%, 2%, it always makes sense to refinance because you'll get a lower interest rate, which will give you a lower house payment. During 2020, when COVID hit, there were a ton of economists that were saying we were about to go into this huge recession. When Nobel Prize winning economist Robert Shiller was asked about this is what he had to say. These are stories that have been amplified, and they've gotten to the point where they may be self-fulfilling prophecies. The inverted yield curve causes a recession because people think it will. So Shiller says instead of spending all of our time studying these projections, we should be allotting some time to studying why these projections, these narratives that economists have put out there, have gone viral. Now, he was intentional about using that phrase, gone viral, because he equated this whole thing to a virus, something that's spread by word of mouth, something that is spread to one person who spreads it to another person, and in the end you have this mass disease as a result. Rational fear is wise, but irrational fear causes irrational consequences, which is why it is so important that we protect ourselves from the virus and we do our part to stop the spread. Hey, if you found value in this video, make sure to subscribe to the Conroe Living channel. On here, you can see me eat an alligator. You can see me get way too inebriated as I do a pub crawl across the city, or learn one of the many reasons that Conroe, Texas is one of the fastest growing cities in America. And again, any real estate questions you have, reach out to me. Feel free to give me a call, text, or email. I would love to help. Thanks for watching.